Thank you so much, Crystal. And for others who've participated previously, you know that Crystal is the anchor to this Women Worth and Wellness initiative. I couldn't do the tech. And of course, she's doing all the marketing and promotion. So COVID has given us some good opportunities. That's all that I will say about COVID. Thank you for joining us for this special Father's Day celebration. Last year, we had 4 fathers and 1 mother talking about how they champion their children, right? How they champion their daughters for their leadership. And what was interesting was I invited 1 mom to come on because she is the mom of 3 young sons. So how do you raise sons to be sensitive to women's worth and wellness? And she said, all I do is I say no means no. Now we know what no means no, but she's raising those boys to understand what no means no. So often the most poignant are the simplest. Now, these leading men today are each fabulous in their own right. We sent their bios through. I'm not going to go through them again, but I will introduce them very briefly. And I will say, I will pick up on a quote from Madeleine Albright, who was the US Secretary of State who passed away in the spring. And she said when she was helping Hillary Clinton become president in 2016, women who do not support women, or there's a special place in hell for women who do not support women. And I will say about these leading men today that there's a special place in heaven for all that you do to champion women's leadership and wellness, including coming on this event today, because, you know, it's like, what is this woman on about? And what does she expect me to say? And you want me to go public with my sayings? So I will say a great appreciation. Very briefly, I will share with you how I know these people. Ron and I worked at Procter & Gamble for over 40 years ago. And I said to Ron, over 40 years ago is like what our parents or grandparents used to say. We can't believe we're that old, but guess what? We're that old. Jay is somebody who I've met from a distance. We were at a recent fundraiser together, but didn't get a chance to talk because we were all masked. And but I know from all the things that he does, he's a huge champion for what we're talking about today. Paul Chapman is someone that I've spent a lot of time working with over the last couple of years. And he has lots of credentials, lots of letters after his name. But of course, the thing that impressed me the most about Paul is he was the first international junior snowboarding champ in 1994 at the age of 15. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Martin is he's just moved into the entrepreneur world. He's the owner of the Duntroon Highlands Golf and Country Club. And this is where Paul and I have been hosting the Women Worth and Wellness golf tournaments, which have been, you know, lots of fun and great outing. We have Mark Halporn. He's not here yet, but he'll join us later. We're going to lead off with Ron. We know that health is the most important thing and our greatest asset. And he's the incoming chair of the Women's College Hospital Foundation Board. There couldn't be a better person in that role. He's going to make amazing things happen. So Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you. And when you're finished, then we'll just introduce Jay briefly and on we go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy. And I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm, as she said, the incoming chair at Women's College Hospital, and I am really pleased to have this opportunity to tell you about all of the great things that are going on right now at Women's College Hospital here in Toronto to make healthcare for women more accessible and more equitable. And I'm going to take you through what we're up to right now. You know, coming out from COVID, gone are the days you wait in a crowded doctor's office for a 10-minute consultation. Digital records, video calls have already changed the way that we interact, all of us, with the medical system. Processes are changing remarkably quickly. And, you know, we all knew that there were opportunities to improve the Canadian healthcare system, which is fundamentally great, but change was glacial. But now everything is changing. This is a great opportunity to change what I call some systemic disadvantages that women have faced in the healthcare system in Canada for literally decades. And let me explain to you what I mean by disadvantages for women. Did you know, well, the healthcare system was frankly designed by men for men. Drug dosages were set by testing on men, not on women, despite the fact the physiology is very different. Did you know that until 1990, women weren't even included in the clinical trials for drugs? And it wasn't until 2010 that clinical trial results were actually analyzed by gender. And you've probably heard that women present with very different symptoms when they have an illness. For example, heart attacks. The women, when they present with a heart attack, have very different symptoms than men. Women's cancers and reproductive health issues deserve and require far more funding. Women usually outlive their spouse or their partner, and frankly, they face a very uncertain healthcare future as they age on their own. And access to healthcare, if you really think about it, is very challenging for what I'm going to call marginalized populations. Who do I mean? Indigenous women, refugees, new Canadian immigrants. Think about victims of family and sexual violence. And it's very challenging, frankly, for the LGBTQ community. And, you know, I think that we would all agree that the burden of COVID fell disproportionately on the shoulders of women as healthcare providers and as homemakers with small children at home. This has created enormous mental health challenges as well. You know, if you step back and think about it, in Canada, there are 10 hospitals with the word children in their name. There are only 4 in Canada that focus on women. So now what's the opportunity? Well, even before the pandemic, we knew there could be improvements. Now we're moving quickly. Women's College Hospital is taking a very leading role. I'm going to explain it to you now in making sure that we rebuild, coming out of COVID, a healthcare system that is more accessible for women and more equitable for women. Let me explain. First of all, we're Canada's only fully ambulatory hospital. And what does that mean? There are no overnight stays. Nobody sleeps over. Therefore, there is no incentive to try and fill beds. Quite frankly, Women's College Hospital are trying to keep people out of the hospital. And we launched the first virtual hospital in Canada way back in 2018 before COVID, because we knew virtual medical contacts can reduce barriers. Let's talk about some other things. We're pioneering same-day women's cancer surgeries with reconstruction in the same procedure. We're doing same-day hip and knee replacements using epidurals. Those were created to help with giving birth instead of general anesthesia. Think of that. You walk in the morning and you walk out with a new hip at the end of the day. We're home to Canada's first and only gender transition surgical program. Very controversial, but that's a population that truly needs support. We've opened a dedicated clinic to try and make Indigenous women feel more comfortable coming into what is otherwise an incredibly threatening environment, a hospital, a modern hospital. We've also opened dedicated clinics to support refugees and to support victims of family and sexual violence. And we're partnering with the Ontario government and taking the lead in a program called Aging in Place. The goal of this program is to make sure people stay in their homes. It's called the Age Lab, and don't end up in an old age home. We're conducting leading edge research on women's health issues and reproductive health with a dedicated research facility. And we're also partnering with the University of Toronto Medical School. We have fantastic partners. And now recently, we co-founded an organization called the Women's Health Collective. And we have put together 7 leading institutions across Canada that are focused on women's health. And we're just about to get charitable designation for that group as well. We think that the leaders at Women's College Hospital, frankly, think that women have been at the margin of the Canadian healthcare system for too long. So what can you do? I got to tell you what you can do to help. Feel free to reach out to me. I think Nancy's going to give you my contact in the notes to this podcast. Take a look at the Women's College Hospital website, sign up for their newsletter, become a donor. And in fact, let me tell you about one program we're raising funds for right now. As an example, we are raising $4.5 million to install 8 state-of-the-art mammogram and breast ultrasound machines. Did you know that 97% of mammogram diagnostic appointments during COVID were canceled? And now women are presenting to Women's College Hospital with stage 3 and stage 4 cancers because they had to skip or they missed their diagnostic appointment. The wait times for a mammogram right now can be months. So every donation, every dollar donated to this new equipment campaign is being matched dollar for dollar by the Fidani Foundation. It is an opportunity to make a very real, very immediate, today impact on women's health. So in conclusion, our own Women's College Hospital, sitting here on University Avenue in Toronto, is taking the lead in helping make women's health more accessible and more equitable. Thank you. Back to you, Nancy.
Well done, Ron. And we will make sure that they do have your email. And I will definitely encourage people to get in touch with you because you're the man to make a significant amount of wonderful things happen going forward. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Jay, over to you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have a lot of things on your to-do list and you've made a lot of wonderful things happen. So please share with us.
It's my pleasure, Nancy, and well done, Ron. So by way of background, I'm born and raised in Montreal. I studied at McGill University, where I did a philosophy degree and 2 law degrees. And in the law school, I met a very important mentor. His name is Irwin Cotler. Some of you might be familiar with that name. International human rights champion. He represented people like Nelson Mandela back in the day and went on to become Canada's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, where he enacted all kinds of progressive laws, including, I think, the world's first same-sex marriage legislation. If it wasn't, he certainly was a pioneer in that area. He freed more people who were wrongfully convicted in 1 year, more than any of the previous ministers combined. And he also was the first man on the Women's Caucus and transformed our Supreme Court into the most gender representative in the world. And all of those things kind of inspired me. And if you fast forward to today, I chair his International Human Rights Board. It's called the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. And amongst many other things, we do work around the world to protect women's rights. But if you rewind, when I graduated, I moved to Toronto, where I worked in the area of helping those who were wrongfully convicted to ultimately secure their freedom. And at the time, DNA technology was becoming more and more reliable. So largely because of that, we were able to be successful in a lot of cases. But eventually, I made a big pivot into the world of executive talent management and executive team building and the like, with a boutique firm that ultimately was bought by the world's largest firm in our sector. Stayed on there for a few years. Life was good. But eventually broke away and started my own firm, which I still run today. We do work all around the world, helping large companies at the top levels, helping private equity firms to change out leadership post-acquisition. And lastly, I've been doing a lot of work to help founders to scale up their businesses. And I do that in many different regards, not only talent strategy, but things like fundraising and business development and overall operational and strategic advice. And I'm heavily weighted toward investing in women and women founders because frankly, from a business point of view, every statistic shows that female founded businesses actually outperform those of their male counterparts. And in that regard, one of the businesses I'm particularly proud to be a part of and invested in is Jessie Draper's Halogen Venture Fund, which is based in Los Angeles, California. She's a 3rd generation venture capitalist. Her grandfather is known to be sort of the founder of venture capital, the godfather of venture capital, if you will. And
Wow.
her dad, Tim Draper, is a very prominent venture capitalist as well. And Halogen Ventures invests exclusively in female founders. And it's a fund that I'm so happy to be a part of. And by the way, the performance has been absolutely stellar. Inspired by Professor Kotler, as well as an advertising executive who came in to Toronto in 2006 to make a speech. And in his speech, he said that he felt women didn't reach top levels of the business world because they didn't have what it takes. They didn't have the toughness. Well, he ended up going home pretty quickly, but it caused me to think about, what is the status of women in corporate Canada? And as you all know, public companies must disclose the compensation of their CEO, CFO, and the next roughly 3 or so top executives in their company. So I thought, why don't I look at the 100, this is 2006, why don't I look at the top 100 companies in Canada and their top 5 roughly best paid executive officers, and determine what the percentage of women was in that group. And I determined in 2006, I thought the numbers would be low. I didn't realize they'd be that low. It was 4.6%. And I was determined to continue to advocate for this issue and do this report on an annual basis. We recently released our 17th annual report. And what I've done over the years is solicit endorsements and quotes and comments in the earlier pages of the report from influencers from various walks of life in order to amplify the discussion and have them in turn amplify their own followers. So our last report had contributions from people ranging from Prime Minister Trudeau to Deepak Chopra to Sheryl Sandberg to Elisa Milano, Andrew Yang, Van Jones, you name it. And I'm determined to continue this work until hopefully one day I work my way out of a job. The good news is this past year, the numbers have doubled. The bad news is we're still under 10%, and there's a whole lot more work to be done. I have a wife and 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and I'm determined to live in a world where my girls have the exact same opportunities as my boy does. And as Sheryl Sandberg once said, a world where we no longer have to talk about women leaders or male leaders, just
Right.
leaders. And that's kind of my story and a little bit of the work I do in terms of trying to advance women. And I think Father's Day is a really opportune time to take stock and have this kind of conversation. So Nancy, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Thanks, Jay, so much. I've met Irwin Kotler at a couple of political events. And
Great.
again, he's just such a gem, such a gem. And as some may know, the Russians despise him and they've tried to poison him at least once, probably more. So watch your soup if you're in the midst of any Russian. I don't know if you know of Women Presidents Organization, WPO, but Rona Levine-Rubin is on as a guest today. And we just had our conference in Montreal. There were 650 women there from all over the world. They're
Amazing.
all women business owners. So Rona, please get in touch with Jay because he'd be a great guest speaker at some conference somewhere, sometime.
I'd be pleased to be in touch and would be happy to be supportive. Sounds great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much, Jay.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, Mr. Ski Boarding Champ from, it's awful. So over to you, Paul, and tell us about your championing women's leadership and wellness.
Yeah, thank you. The snowboarding thing, that was a few years ago, but sports changed a lot since then, that's for sure. But I enjoy it. My children really enjoy it now. They ski and snowboard. But just for some background briefly, I've spent 25 years in finance, including 20 years in capital markets roles through investment banking and sales and trading and prime finance across a few firms on Bay Street. Throughout these roles, I've had the pleasure and privilege to work with some leading women. And for the last few years, I've worked on the wealth management side in the finance world, and I currently run a wealth management practice at RBC, where a key focus of mine, as you know, is on empowering women, and the majority of my business actually has been working with women. So that's been great, and I've had the pleasure over my career of being able to work with some leading and progressive women, both in my roles in finance and across the business world, which includes my wife, Nancy, who's a founder of Sapsucker Maple Water, which I have on my desk. I don't know if some of you would recognize these, but it's maple water, and she helps drive this business along with Arlene Dickinson, who you know from Dragon's Den, and she's an advocate, as you well know, and a cornerstone investor in that company. So I'm also a father of two beautiful children, 9 and 11, including one daughter who is a force of nature herself. So helping her build her confidence to lead is imperative, I think, in my role as a father. I'd start by saying the state of women's leadership and empowerment isn't all bad news, but I think we need to put it in the context, which we've heard a bit on this presentation so far, to frame the conversation. And some are, 100 and almost 200 heads of state across the world, only 25 are women. So at this rate, you're not going to have equality for 130 years there. A quarter of people in parliament in the world are women. In C-level jobs and board seats across the world, less than a quarter are women. In the finance industry, where I've spent my time in my career, I think worldwide, research analysts, for instance, only 15% of those are women. And in Canada, on Bay Street, that number drops to below 10. So, building a career in many sectors, but in the finance roles, requires a lot of commitment and hard work and motivation, and the hours are long and unpredictable. I can speak to that firsthand, which affects your whole personal ecosystem, which requires extensive support from all levels of an organization, as well as support at home, as we well know. And there was a comment earlier about COVID really upended that even worse, and it's a lot of the jobs a lot of the work at home fell on the shoulders of women. And but I think we're at an inflection point. To a point, I think championing leading women in diversity can no longer be treated as an obstacle or an afterthought. And to be successful, organizations just simply need to reflect the true reality of the marketplace. So a good quote from a former colleague of mine and now head of investment banking at BMO, actually, she says, I quote, "Having a more diverse talent pool makes conversations and decisions richer. It brings true diversity of thought," end quote. And I would say the old boys club in many industries is finally starting to break down. I've seen this firsthand across Bay Street. That's not to say it's perfect by any stretch, but it is improving over time. So I think we all need to improve our blind spots, personally and in organizations, and become aware of the unconscious biases. And encouragingly, many organizations are becoming engaged on this front, and I've seen that through my time as well in the companies I've worked with. So I think we'd all agree that women need to be represented equally in the decision process that affects them and their health and wealth, Nancy would say, and their bodies, both in careers and at home. So as I thought through potential actions and solutions as I see them, I think the good news is we don't have to we don't have to recreate the wheel. We have many solutions already, and I would summarize them in 3 parts, at least in the corporate world and overall. But we all need to be proactive. We can't be dangerous or incite change from the sidelines. I think everyone has to acknowledge the issue, acknowledge our privilege, understand that each one of us can contribute and drive real change. In keeping this issue front and center and relevant, such as this event itself, is imperative. And I think, the Canadian Business Corporations Act actually requires diversity disclosures, but few companies that, don't act and follow through as much as they should. So keeping things relevant. And that starts with, second point I'd make is leadership. Progressive culture starts at the top. There's no question about that. It includes everything from how organizations look at their talent acquisition and promotions all the way up to the board. So when you get more women in leadership roles, that's when you'll get cultural change in the organization. If opportunities for upward mobility don't become available, there aren't many people, male or female, that want to remain in junior positions and where they're not in control of their career path or schedule or workload. Industry programs are important as well. Nancy mentioned the WPO, but in the finance world, there's an industry program called Women in Capital Markets. It's an initiative that helps propel women up the corporate ladder through various means. And they have on-ramped over 90 women in the mid and senior level roles at all the big financial institutions, insurance companies, and banks, and include back to work programs for women who have taken a career break to start a family, such as the Return to Bay Street program. I've seen that firsthand, which is a great initiative as well. So I think ultimately we need to shift the bias or the focus for advancement away from gender, of course, to true skills and performance as the objective criteria. So I'd leave you, it's not all doom and gloom, and there's improvement on this front, and we need to continue on this front, and leaving you with some positive statistics and a little optimism around the subject, where I think we're making progress and positive change is continuing, and it'll be inevitable in time, I'd like to think. So I think we're at a defining moment in our evolution on this, and women are in fact taking control in many respects. I think for every two men who get a college degree, this is in the US, 3 women will do the same. Women, for the first time in just this year in the US, that is, have become the majority of the US workforce, which is maybe surprises a few. And over half of the managers across US industries are women. In the 15 professions that are projected to grow the most in the next 10 years, all but 2 of them are already dominated by women. So we're going in the right direction. So, I would leave it by saying equality is not a woman's problem, it's everyone's problem. And this topic makes me think of my young children. They don't, children don't see, or certainly don't judge based on sex or religion or race. That cultural influence seems to come, get instilled a little later in life, but obviously starts young. But I think we've all seen that evolution. But imagine the narrative if it shifts for everyone, where you can walk into a boardroom and no one notices if, everyone's male or female, and that will evolve over time. And I think that's becoming more the case, but there's still progress to be made. So it's my hope that we get to a place where we don't have to celebrate women in business, but rather individual achievements for what they are. So I think we need to shift this context. Women leaders and successful women should be ordinary and accepted and a non-issue, rather than seeing them as a special group. So I think we need to be at a place where someone isn't celebrated as a woman leader, but just as a leader. And I think that was reflected in Jay's comments at the end as well. But thank you, Nancy, and everyone on the panel.
Thank you, Paul. Once again, fabulous. Paul really is a champion for everyone. And I think that's your key point. Especially when you've come from the sports world, that you're a champion for everybody who's the best athlete, regardless of what their gender is. And that's all we want to do, is get that message across, that in your midst, there are people, and especially women, to champion. So take a second look and, how can I help that woman get to a next level where she might want to be? And women often they wait to be invited. They don't want to put themselves out there, because then awfully nasty things are said about them. And recently I've been saying women need to stop waiting to be invited. If you want to be on a certain board, what board do you want to be on? Who do you know? Blah, blah, blah. The routine. So anyway, great, Paul. Thank you. Thank you so much. So over to our special golfing buddy, Martin, who is the new owner of Duntroon Highlands Golf Course. And, his background is Procter & Gamble. He's done all sorts of different things. Where I met Martin was at the Collingwood Economic Development Group. And Martin, you'll meet Mark, who's coming up, because I met him through Moses Neimer's Ideas Conference. And I know you were a participant there as well. So tell us about Duntroon and tell us about your comments on this topic.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and it's great to be on such a great panel. When Nancy first asked me to be on this panel, I automatically said yes, and I had these insights that were popping up in my head, and especially given that it's just before Father's Day, I want to share 5 insights on men raising daughters and how that has been the foundation for creating a workforce that has women in leadership roles in an industry that's been particularly dominated by men, golf. So it's a bit of a full circle kind of story, if you will. I had the fortune of working with women in leadership roles for much of my marketing career. It informed what I and my wife wanted to set up as a foundation for my daughter. And that is now a foundation for the way that we want to operate Duntroon Highlands Golf, as a place where people are treated equally and women have the opportunity to have leadership roles. So let me start with One final comment. These ideas came in, I had all these insights. I'm going, oh, those are just my personal opinions, probably. Like, that's all great to share them, but is there any fact-based information out there? And I'll share this in the chat. I found this study that Equimundo did. And this group is a community committed to promoting, nurturing equitable, nonviolent masculinity. And it's really interesting in terms of the research they've done that I'm reading. I'm going, this is actually corroborating all the stuff that I've learned over these years that we're trying to apply at the golf course. So anyways, I'll put that into the chat in a few seconds so you can take a look at that. One of the things that came out of the study and that I personally have a lot of passion for is the importance that fathers have to make in terms of committing to be positive and extensive parenting role models in terms of engaging with their daughters in particular. And that's going beyond engaging in household activities, right? Like taking out the garbage, doing the barbecue, doing an occasional wash here and there. No, I'm talking about being immersive in terms of cooking with the kids, cooking with the daughter, exposing daughters to activities they have a passion for, not what dad wants to go and do, right? Yeah, I love car racing, but if my daughter doesn't have a passion for it, please don't go there. On the other hand, if your daughter has a lot of passion for motorbiking, please take her out there. So to me, that whole piece around getting kids immersed, daughters in particular, early on, and having fathers actually decide to take time off is incredibly important. And certainly the research is supporting that time and time again. I had the fortune that my employer at the time, Campbell Soup, said, Wednesday afternoons, Martin, we know that you will have a passion for taking time with your daughter. Please go off, do your karate lessons with her. And then we'd go grocery shopping together. Traditionally women do the grocery shopping. I was like, no, that doesn't work. I love food. I grew up in the food industry. So we'd go grocery shopping together. And I'm talking like 4 or 5 years old, we'd pick out the different stuff and then we'd make dinner together. We'd eat dinner together. Those Wednesdays were incredibly important bonding times. And what's interesting, my daughter now has a huge passion for cooking. And it's not hey, I'm cooking because that's a women's role. This is because I have a passion for it. So that's a real important piece. But the one thing that continues to boggle my mind is we assume that fathers know how to be good parents to daughters. The amount of education that's out there for fathers is incredibly limited. It's like, here you go and drive a car. We'll give you all teaching lessons. But if you have a daughter, go figure it out on your own. There's a huge opportunity for education of fathers and what their role should be in raising confident young women. My second insight is the importance of taking a leadership role in creating memorable, positive experiences at an early age between the father and the daughter. It's not just, let's go out for a family outing, which are very important too. But there is an important aspect, and the research once again supports it, that if daughters can see fathers taking an active role on a one-on-one basis and experience memorable occasions where dad is not distracted, is not doing other stuff with his buddies or whatever, but is focused on that child and gives that child leadership opportunities, there is an immense exponential impact for those daughters in terms of their relationship with men and how they grow into confident leaders in whatever organization they may be working in. For us, traveling was a big thing. So from the age of 3, we'd go on daddy-daughter trips. And these became into very elaborate trips eventually, where my daughter actually sets the agenda. She does the whole itinerary and figures it all out. And it was interesting how now for her, traveling, going around is not an issue. She sets that and she just goes for it. And the amount of confidence that I think women get out of that is incredibly important, which leads me to my third insight, which is the importance of women, young women in particular, being able to travel and have progressive educational opportunities that expose them to environments where they actually get to see different ways that men act in society. In North America, we have a specific perception of how men should act. And as much as we're trying to break that paradigm, I feel we're still behind, particularly some of the Scandinavian countries. I had the fortune of having an engineering housemate when I was at Queen's. And she's now actually gone on to be the head of IT at CHIO and just a real role model in terms of women in engineering taking on leadership roles. And I believe that a lot of that comes from the confidence that comes from the Norwegian and Swedish models of society, where men and women have achieved a whole different level of equitability versus where we stand right now in North America. And that's not to say that they're perfect, but I think the importance of traveling and exposing young women to those different models, to different family models where men play a different role than the typical paradigm, is incredibly important. Okay, last two insights, and these get more into the workforce piece, focusing on integration versus segregation. I had this incredible aha moment in first year engineering. I'd come from a private school, all boys private school. And I got asked to be on this panel to see if that private school should go co-ed. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go to the cafeteria. I'm gonna ask the women, engineering, arts, you name it. Do you notice the difference between guys that come from an all boys private school versus a co-ed school? Without exception, every woman said, yes, I can tell like that. I'm like, are you serious? Like, what are we doing differently? And they're like, you haven't grown up around women. You've sort of had time to go and party with them, you go out, but you didn't go to school with them. You didn't hear them speak. You didn't work with them. I can tell right away because of the way that you treat us. They're just a different level of respect. Well, needless to say, I went back to my private school and said, guys, we got to change it real fast. There is a big time issue we've got in here. And for me, that has set a real sensitive point that I've got around integration versus segregation, the importance of giving women a chance to be part of teams and not dismissing it as, you know what, no, you don't have the qualifications yet. In today's world, particularly in entrepreneurship, the letters that you've got behind your name, sorry, Paul, don't necessarily mean anything in terms of what you can contribute to that organization. In fact, there are lots of models that would say women that sometimes come from a completely different perspective are some of the best leaders and contribute most to organizations. So my last insight is about actively putting a spotlight on women in the workplace, and particularly in the golf industry. And it's interesting, I take a look around a lot of golf courses, and it's sad, actually. Most of them are still playing by the old boys rules, if you will. It's changing, but slowly. We have the fortune that on our senior management team of 3 people, we have 1 woman. On our broader management team, we're happy to share that we've got one of the first Black superintendents in Ontario. So that diversification is an important point and changes the conversation. We've talked about it already, the important role that women have in leadership situations. And I saw it at P&G where women were held as equals many decades ago. And that to me is something that I want to continue striving for within the golf industry. That means actively engaging women in decisions around how we stock the pro shop, how we organize the pro shop. It's active engagement in what kind of specials we put on at the cafe. How can we improve the service there, as opposed to relying on the typical way of doing it. Oh, the guys want their beer and their burger. What about bringing the women's perspective in terms of what they want? And it's interesting from a business standpoint, our women's league on Tuesdays remains probably our busiest day of the whole week. And I honestly do believe it's because we have women servers serving women with the insights that come from being women and knowing what they're looking for and shaping what that day looks like for the women. We do need to continue changing the paradigm. And one of the other things that we're trying to do is making sure that from the day we open through to the day we close, we are giving women every opportunity to take leadership roles. And that's everything from our hiring practices and the strong emphasis we put on training people on our values, male and female, and making sure that day in and day out, we as leaders at the management team level are showcasing those same values of respect, no matter who you are or what your orientation is. Second of all, encouraging women to golf. If you take a look at our Instagram, you'll see how many women are out there golfing. The Women Worth and Wellness program is another example of it. Our women's days, our clinics, and so on, is because women need to have a place in that industry. And unless we profile them and we give them those opportunities, it's not going to happen. Women Worth and Wellness is an event that for our staff, females in particular, is such a shining point in terms of our overall season, because they go, you know what, my employer is committed to equality. And last but not least, we just had an event that's, I'm hoping, going to become an annual event. We worked with several organizers here in town in Collingwood, putting on the W event, which was actually forming a W on our 18th fairway that was all about women's leadership and encouraging women to come together and help each other be stronger leaders. And we actually had all our staff come out, all the women come out, be part of that W. And it was amazing how they felt so much more energized, knowing that as an employer, once again, we were prepared to support that. And in fact, go above and beyond in terms of making that a very unique experience for them. So there go my 5 insights. Hopefully you found them interesting. Certainly happy to answer any questions afterwards, and feel free to share my email as well.
Way to go, Martin. Way to go. You have done an exceptional job in thinking it all through. And really, what do you care about most on this whole topic? And you've already put a myriad of things in place. And that's why Paul and I it's just a pleasure to come. And Sandra Post, of course, loves it as well. I mean, everything is just tickety-boo. We get through it. We have a great time. And to see all those women's smiling faces is what it's all about. Martin's wife, Stacy, is also a gem, customer service to the max. I don't think she's ever walked anywhere. She's running all the time. But again, just a pleasure to work with. Jay, I think Martin's daughter Hannah's at McGill, isn't she?
She was. She decided to transfer to Queens.
Oh my, sorry about that. Oh, well, that's where you went, isn't it?
It is. So rowing is her big passion. So.
Okay, well, voila.
Well, one of my daughters and my son both went to Queens, so I'm a big Queens enthusiast as well.
Well, that's good. Good to hear. Good to hear.
That's a great town and a great university.
Excellent. It is. It's just down the road from Picton, where I am. Mark, I see you've arrived. And Mark, I met him, as I mentioned, at Moses and Eimer's Ideas Conference. Being a wealth advisor, obviously estate planning is a huge part of the work that you do. But often as a wealth advisor, you're focused on the investment portfolio, especially these days, when in fact, nobody knows when, your time is up. So having all your affairs in order is extremely important. What Mark focuses on as well is the whole concept of philanthropy. He's come up with an accidental philanthropist title, because often when people have not paid attention to the power of philanthropy as it pertains to not just giving back, but your bottom line, your net worth, it is extremely powerful. So I've been a champion for women's leadership power through philanthropy, and that's how I've come to know Mark and work with him and refer some people to him. So Mark, over to you. You've got about 5-7 minutes. We'll cut you off if you keep going. I know you love to talk. So over to you.
No, I'm going to make this short and sweet, Nancy. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to join such a great group of leaders and thought leaders in industry to talk about a very important subject. I just wanted to say that I've been in professional practice for 30 years, but my real start actually was in 1974 when I was 11. And that's when my father, blessed memory, died of a massive heart attack at the age of 50. I was the youngest of 4 boys, and my mother, of blessed memory, was 48 at the time, and she had to go back to work to support our family. It was very tough for us. We all managed, but it was for her in particular. She had to have a household full of 4 boys, and during that time, without any fanfare, she took care of all of us, and she was extremely generous. There wasn't one charity that would come to our door that she didn't give on multiple occasions, even though she didn't have the kind of money. So the good news is that you really don't have to be a Warren Buffett or a Bill Gates in order to be a philanthropist. It's really just doing something called planning as opposed to investing. A lot of people are doing investing, but they're really not doing planning. And for us, our beginning was around a Jewish word called tzedakah. Tzedakah is a Jewish word that often gets translated as charity, but it really means justice and righteousness. It's really a social and moral obligation to give back to communities and unfortunate people, indigenous, whatever, people who have less than you have, because we're living in a great country where we have a lot more. And we have to really feel tremendous pleasure and gratitude for what we have in order to be able to give it to other people. The thing around planning is that, most people go through life and they haven't done planning to realize that chances are they're going to have a lot more money left when they die than what they have today, which means that they're the custodian or trustee for the next generation. But what they're not realizing is that they're also partnering with the tax department on that money. So there are ways with planning to be able to take that never spend money that you're just paying taxes on and use it to preserve your estate or to create money for philanthropy or for both. And I think that the real reality out there is most people don't realize that we all have three possible beneficiaries to our estates. You have family, you have charity, and you have the tax department. And each of us can only pick two. Which two would you pick? Most people would take family and charity. So with proper planning, there's ways to be remembered to give a lot of money and create a legacy for family as opposed to writing a big check to the tax department. Now, for most people out there, when they gift money today, they're giving cash, checks, and credit cards. But I will tell you that that is the most cost and tax inefficient way to give. The government has created or provided us opportunities to be able to give more money at less cost. And as Nancy said, we create something called accidental philanthropists. I mean, that means that there are some people who give because it's part of their DNA. And then there are those people who don't give. But when they realize that they can give their tax money to charity, suddenly they become accidental philanthropists. And some of the best accidental philanthropists out there are people who are single, widowed, and divorced. And there's a lot of single women, a lot of divorced women, a lot of widowed women who that's just the reality out there. And they don't realize without having a spouse that they're one incident away from having a very big tax disposition because there's no spouse to roll over all of their assets to on a tax-free basis. So it's really important for them to go through the exercise to be able to see, can I be generous? And we've identified over 20 ways to be more generous than cash checks and credit cards. And I just want to focus on one of them today and then wrap up because it's a part of our Canadian fabric that when you turn 65 in Canada, you can start receiving something called CPP, which is Canada Pension Plan. And, it's for most people who are very wealthy, it's really not something that they need for their lifestyle. It works out for a husband and wife to about $26,000 a year. And they're taxed on that and they reinvest the money and they're taxed again. But once they die, the CPP is also gone with them. So we've created something called CPP philanthropy, where there are 4 ways to use government benefits to be very philanthropic. One way is a couple could take $26,000 and create a $1.5 million life insurance policy. If that's owned by charity, then the $26,000 from CPP is considered charitable donation. You don't pay any taxes on that, and you've created $1.5 million. Second way is take the $26,000 and get the $1.5 million policy, pay the taxes on the CPP, but donate the death benefit upon your passing to charity, which on a $1.5 million policy would save an estate $750,000 of taxes. A third way is take the CPP, get the $1.5 million policy, pay taxes on the CPP, but make your children the beneficiary of the insurance and instead donate your registered assets, your RSPs and RIFs, which will be taxed at 54%. It's a big uptick for family and a lot of money for charity. But the last thing, which I like, is charity begins at home. You could go ahead and take that CPP, get the $1.5 million policy, and have the beneficiary be your children or your grandchildren. That could actually create a pension for them. There's a $1.5 million amount of money that's invested at 5%. That could generate $75,000 in perpetuity for grandchildren or to give to charity. How great would that be to create a legacy? And I think it's really important that we have to realize today that the world has changed. Most people don't know the names of their great-grandparents, their grandparents. It's not that cohesive family anymore. Yet really charity, philanthropy is the way to pass along those morals and those values and those sense of obligation to society. And the way that we do that is through charity, through religion, for both. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that all it requires is sitting down with a professional advisor and doing some planning and determining, how do you want to be remembered? What would you like to do today? COVID has made us much more aware of our mortality. And the fact is that anything can happen at any time. And we have a lot of incompletions. The time to take care of those incompletions is while the sun is shining. And the women today, they're the leaders of the families. They're going to be the ones who are going to be inheriting a lot of wealth in this country. And they, in particular, have a tremendous feeling to give back. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of us who are on this call, yourself, for people that you know, you should really be taking advantage of this and make a difference and be remembered for leaving a legacy as opposed to writing a big check for the tax department. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Thanks so much. It's a complex topic, but it's one where you put your arms on the desk and you sit down and you say, okay, one day it will be the day after. And what do I want my affairs to look like at that moment in time, and dealing with it now? We made some changes in our own portfolio. My husband kept saying, I really want to make a donation to PBS. You know, he kept barking away. I said, you know what? we're going to make that happen. And this is what happens so frequently, is people just don't sit down and say, you know what, one day I'm not going to be here. And the last thing you want is the day after saying, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry we didn't get that paperwork submitted or whatever. So thanks, Mark. We've got about 8 minutes. We've got a very special person, Melanie, who's going to do a thank you. But I'm wondering if we have any particular questions from any of our guests. We've probably got about a couple of minutes to answer any questions that anybody might have.
I do. So, this is a question. The statistics that Paul indicated regarding the number of women in some field and the studies becoming the majority. So my question is with regards to parents raising sons. I have a 21-year-old. How do you keep them motivated and engaged in the importance of diversity and equity? I'm feeling that some young adult men, even if they understand the importance of these objectives, feel a bit left out, as they may also struggle in the academic world. Any words of wisdom? And this can be open to anybody.
Ron, you're smiling. You better go first.
That's a very difficult one. I think all we can do is continue to promote the values of diversity and inclusion. Life is a competition, but at the end, but in many ways it's not. It's self-actualization. It's being able to be the best you can be, finding a direction, a career, a passion, following it, having the satisfaction of being, the best you can be. And I think as parents, we have to be very careful we don't instill in people a negative sense of competition or a sense of, I'm disadvantaged because I am X. It's all, magnify their talents and their gifts and show appreciation and encouragement. And again, I have a 45-year-old son, a 42-year-old daughter, a 40-year-old daughter, and 6 grandkids.
Wow.
5 little girls and a little boy. And I must tell you, my wife and I think about this all the time. And even when they're 45 years of age, they're still your kids. They still face challenges and they still question where their careers are going. So again, it's just being nurturing, positive, encouraging. There's no silver bullet here. I think as one of our other panelists said, there's no instruction. That's a trite comment, but there is no instruction booklet.
No. Anybody else? Jay?
Well, I think certainly as you continue to progress in your career, if you dabble in entrepreneurialism, ultimately in investments, if you're a manager at a company, a large corporation, it's to your advantage to encourage and advance women and bring women into your team, bring women on as partners and peers, because study after study has shown, and there's McKinsey studies along those lines and Harvard studies along those lines, like hundreds, literally. Study after study shows that the greater the diversity around the table, the better the business results. So it's a bottom line profitability kind of incentive. So if an individual can't necessarily wrap their mind around the moral imperative of equality, sometimes money talks, and you'd be serving yourself well to bring on a diverse slate of partners, subordinates, peers, etc. If you want to have a thriving business, is what I'd say.
Excellent, excellent. Well, each of you leading men understands all of this, and you're already taking action in your own worlds. And you're also role models to other men and women. You know, it isn't all men who need to champion women. Women need to champion women. And I would like to introduce Melanie now, who's going to give a thank you. She is someone that I met about 3 years ago. And I just read about her in a local newsletter in Thornbury. And quite a special, I refer to young women like Melanie as a Renaissance woman. And I say Renaissance because she's the mother of 2 young children. She got her MBA. She has a full-time job. You know, I thought I was working hard when I had a full-time job and only 1 child and not taking any extra courses. So she's the next generation. And it has been my pleasure to champion Melanie every step of the way and introduce her to whoever I can. The other thing that's wonderful about Melanie is she's up for it. Like, she just loves all these opportunities and will be the CEO of some major corporation at some point in time, although she is a social impact person. So maybe Jay, actually, Jay, you're on the advisory board of where she's currently, she's at Hoot Reading. So Melanie.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Wow, what a small world.
Exactly. Melanie, are you there?
That's a fantastic company. That's a rocket ship.
Sorry.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you so much, Nancy.
Oh, Melanie, of course. That's such a small world. Good to see you, Melanie.
It's
to
good
hear
to
from you.
see you. I don't know how to get my video on, but I wanted to just give a big thank you to all the speakers today, and of course to Nancy and Crystal. Your events are always great. I think, Nancy, you are always championing women, and what's special about this event is that it really highlights how one theme across all the speakers was that it doesn't matter what sector you're in, what gender you are, everyone wins when we advance equality for everyone. And so when we think about how we can advance women's worth, wealth, and wellness, I think we all have a really great role to play, whether you're an investor, an advisor like Jay, an entrepreneur, or you work in the nonprofit sector. There's so many opportunities. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And thank you for the speakers for sharing your wisdom. I know this is only one of many great conversations to come from Nancy and her team.
Excellent. And Ron, I know at Women's College, they have a special program for a cohort that donate 100,000. But they're also focused on the daughters of that group. So Melanie, I know you have no time at all, but you would be an ideal person to get involved because they want to focus on millennials.
Oh,
Ron?
absolutely. Absolutely. And women, I mean, we have a group called 100 Women for Women's that are the strongest supporters. If you donate $100,000, commit to that over, can be as many years as you want, but it's a special role in the hospital. And also their daughters. So yes, please reach out to me. I encourage people to reach out. Love to talk to you about women's.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up because we're at 5:29 and I know these guys, they're on the clock as much as we all are. But once again, you guys were terrific. Thank you so much for getting involved and sharing your wisdom. And as I said, men who champion women's leadership and wellness, there's a special place in heaven for all of you, but don't go there anytime soon because we've got a whole lot more work to do. And for everybody who's on, we'll make sure you've got their contact info and you can see that each of these guys is terrific in their own world and would welcome to get to know you better. So thank you so much.
Happy Father's
Thank you,
Day.
Nancy. Thank you, Crystal.
Yes.
Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Happy Father's
you.
Day. Happy Father's Day indeed.
Thank
Happy
you.
Father's Day.
We will be sharing this recording on social media as well as everybody here or is registered will get a copy of the recording. We encourage you to share and help spread the message. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
You.
Bye-bye.